Last weekend, my biggest fear came true. I left the track in an ambulance. And just to clarify, I didn't arrive in an ambulance, although a bike would fit in the back quite nicely. But the point is, while I lay next to the track, and then in an ambulance, and then in the hospital, my mind had plenty of time to consider whether the fun of riding a motorcycle was worth the risk of potentially damaging my spine forever. So before I break down my crash and debate whether motorcycles are worth the risk, I first wanted to thank everybody who messaged me. It made the hospital much less depressing. And secondly, I'm going to be just fine. I got very lucky. There are a lot of people who don't get as lucky as I am and who have injuries that are potentially permanent. But that doesn't change the fact that having a back injury is a scary experience, especially when you don't know the extent of the damage and all you know is that you can't move. I've been riding motorcycles since I was 8 years old. I got my road license when I was 16 and I've spent the last 9 years riding on the road multiple times per week. And I've been fortunate enough to never have an accident on the street. Of course, I've had countless incidences and close calls, but nothing worth writing home about. As a result, I've always argued the stigma of motorcycles being dangerous. I've always said things like, motorcycles aren't the problem, the rider is the problem. Or, motorcycles aren't dangerous, it's the dangerous car drivers around us that are the issue. And that kind of rang true for my crash, because the problem was 100% me. And to be honest, I prefer it that way. I would much rather be the problem and the person who screws up to injure me than to be hit by a car or by a driver that was on their phone or something. But last weekend I had a motocross accident that kind of changed my outlook on motorcycles, at least in the moment. So the accident. It happened at a track that I've never been to before, which I guess is probably how a lot of accidents happen. But the reason I was at this track is because 2 weeks before that, I did my first ever motocross race. And the next week, there was gonna be a race at this new track. So I went to have a look at the track to see if I could figure it out in a day and see whether I'd want to do the race the following next weekend or not. 4 laps into my first session, I'd kind of figured out all of the jumps except for the biggest one on the track. It was just a very big tabletop. I jumped onto the top of it a few times to get a feeling for the takeoff, but to be honest, the takeoff just didn't feel that nice. The weird part is that my girlfriend was actually filming parts of the first session, which she never does. I often ask her to film sessions or jumps later in the day, but usually you never want to film the first session, especially at a new track, because you're going so slowly and not really jumping everything that it kind of just looks boring. So this is how I ended up with the crash. Well, most of it on video. I'd sent a few jumps on the first 4 laps and gotten lucky, so to be honest, I was feeling pretty confident. So on my 5th-ish lap, I was coming up to this big tabletop and I figured that I should probably just man up and try and jump it, because the longer you leave it, the more intimidating it's going to get. I thought that I was hitting it with just enough speed to hopefully clear it, if not just land a bit too short of it and bounce off the top of it, which would have been scary, but a lot less scary than what did happen. But once I was in the air, I realized that I was still in the air and the landing was back there. This is probably the scariest and stupidest thing I've ever done. The feeling of being a couple of meters in the air and having the landing behind you, knowing that you have to land on flat ground, is an awful feeling. You can see that I only reached my max height probably just before the landing. The jump itself is considerably taller than me, so probably around 2.5–3 meters high, and then I still absolutely launched it and probably doubled the height of the jump. The angles are a bit deceptive, but that will be my guess. So I might be being a bit dramatic, but I would say it was at least about 6 meters in the air. And you don't realize how much energy a landing absorbs until you have to land on flat ground. So I have no idea how high it really was, but you have to fall from quite a height to hurt yourself, especially with motocross suspension, and somehow I managed to do that. My girlfriend instantly dropped the camera and ran, so I apologize on her behalf for the bad footage, but you can see in the last frame just how bottomed out I am. I paid for the whole suspension and I was gonna use the whole suspension. And then some. I've never seen my bike that flat, both wheels nestled in the fenders, and I'm pretty much at one with the bike. It happened so fast that I don't even remember what I hit where, but I just remember as it rebounded, pain shooting up through my back. So the weirdest part is that I didn't even crash. You can hear in the video that I ride out of it. I've never hurt myself so much on a motorcycle without crashing before. But as I rolled out and I felt my back in pain, I knew that I had to get off of the bike, but I didn't know how. It didn't feel like anything wanted to move. I couldn't really pull the brakes. I couldn't put my leg out to put it down. So in the end, I sort of just veered to the side of the track, stepped off it and let the bike go, and instantly just lay on my back. I was writhing around trying to find a position that didn't hurt, and I just couldn't find one. We've all heard the horror stories of people getting paralyzed, but you have it in the back of your mind and you hope that you never do anything to get close to that. But in the moment, I thought I was. I was winded and my back was sore, and my brain wasn't smart enough in the moment to work out that I'd been moving my legs and wiggling my toes. There are two rules that everybody knows about motorcycle accidents. Number one is if you hit your head, you don't remove the helmet, and if you hurt your back, you don't move so that you don't do any more damage. So this was basically my main priority, was to not move so that I didn't do any more damage. I must have also hit my face on the handlebars because I instantly had a black eye, but luckily I don't remember it. The part I'm most thankful for about that whole experience was that there were two first responders also at the track just riding, and they were a huge help. They were the ones that told me not to move so that I didn't do any more damage, helped to get me more comfortable, and even called the ambulance and helped to organize all of that stuff. I ended up lying next to the track for about an hour. There'd been an accident on a nearby highway, and apparently all the ambulances had gone there. But I didn't want to move in case I did more damage to my back, so what I really needed was one of those stretchers that they clamp on either side of you to be able to get you to hospital without moving your back. And this was probably the worst hour of my life. From there, I finally went to the emergency room where I got a CT scan on my full upper body and x-rays of both of my ankles. And finally, some good medication. From that, I found out that I had a fractured left ankle. I'd broken 4 ribs in the back right here, and I had a compression fracture in my L2 vertebra, which is down here in your sort of lumbar region. And to be honest, that was a relief. The next day in hospital, I got to see the neurosurgeon who requested an MRI on my back just to be on the safe side. An MRI that I had to pay for. But hey, you can't put a price on your back. Fortunately, after 20 minutes of a claustrophobic person's worst nightmare, there was no more damage at least. And after 3 days in hospital where they x-rayed my chest every single morning to make sure my ribs weren't gonna puncture my lungs, I finally got to go home. I've never had so many scans and needles in my life. The most interesting part to me was where my mind would wander during this whole process. In the moment of lying next to the track waiting for an ambulance, not knowing what was wrong with my back, I would happily have traded not ever riding a motorcycle again just to be able to walk and for my back not to be damaged. And even a whole week later, I would still trade that just after knowing this feeling. This is also the first time that I've ever crashed and worried more about my own health than the bike. I just stepped off it. I didn't even switch it off. I just let it run. Normally my mindset is that I can heal, but the bike is expensive to fix and I love it. But this time was different. I would happily have given up the bike just to have not had any damage to my spine. Our minds are cruel. They always expect the worst. I also remember being upset that this was happening to me. I love movement. I ride motorcycles, I ride bicycles, I run, I go for a walk 2 times a day. Any chance I get to go and walk or use my body, I actually take. So I couldn't understand why this was happening to me and not a fat person who never leaves the couch. For the first 3 days, I was very happy to just sell the bike and quit motocross. And to be honest, even today, I'm not 100% sure if I will stick with it. I will definitely ride again and try it again, but I'm not sure how cooperative my mind is going to be. Even just watching a jump similar to what I injured myself on kinda scares me. When motocross goes right, it's the most awesome feeling I've ever experienced, and there's nothing quite as rewarding as that feeling. But when it goes wrong, it goes really wrong. And I'm still trying to figure out if that reward is worth the risk. But the biggest issue is that you can't just shake off your passion. Even while I was lying there in the emergency room, My brain was thinking about all the jumps that I got right and how much fun that was. And in the back of my mind, I was thinking I should really go and do that again when I get the chance because it was a lot of fun. And only then would I work out that that is why I was in the hospital in the first place. I also opened up Instagram and was immediately shown motocross videos, and I just sat there and enjoyed them. When I got home, I instantly started binging motocross videos on YouTube. So ultimately, you can't get rid of the passion. So are motorcycles worth the risk? In that moment, definitely not. That was the scariest thing I've ever experienced. But a few days later, knowing that all I need is some time to heal and I'll be all right, I think it is worth it. This past year of progressing at motorcycle is the most fun I've had pretty much my entire life, and I wouldn't want to give that up, even if it did come at a cost. There's also an element of getting back on the horse. I don't want to be scared of motocross for the rest of my life. Instead, I want to learn from my mistakes. In hindsight, I obviously shouldn't have just tried to man up and hit that jump. I should have taken a much more measured approach. But I also wouldn't have learned that I don't have the experience required to learn how to progress on those jumps if I hadn't got it wrong. I just wish getting it wrong didn't hurt this much. Now I know that I don't have the experience required to get a big jump like that right the first time, and that's okay. But anyway, let me know if you've ever contemplated whether motorcycles are worth the risk or not. I'd love to hear your outlook on it, and I'll see you on the next ride.